They are not telling you everything. We just had the biggest solar impact in over 2 decades, and boom, a massive winter storm covers two-thirds of the United States, and crazy weather breaks out all over the globe. Also, ahead of the storm, people were reporting alleged chemtrails in record numbers. So, what's really going on? This has serious ramifications for our future. So, in a psychic forecast, I'm going to break this all down, look into what's really going on, what fueled this historic winter storm, and what that means for our future. Globally, the weather's been crazy lately. Here in the US, we just had a historic, massive winter storm, dumped feet of snow in the north, and up to and even over an inch of ice accretion in the south, which is devastating. And there's thunder sleet and thunder freezing rain. And though nature, natural terrestrial weather is capable of producing an event like this, it's very rare but not unheard of. Something just isn't right. There's something else at play. I feel it intuitively. I've done a lot of research on it, and both as a trained meteorologist as well as an intuitive and a channel, the pieces are starting to come together, and it's not at all what it seems. So we'll get into the geoengineering part in a minute, but let's dive into a little bit of space weather now. Solar storms absolutely do affect terrestrial weather, geology. Not all scientists are on board with that, but as time goes on and more research is done, more and more are. And intuitively, I'm 99.9% sure that that is true. Recently, we just had a G4, a very powerful geomagnetic storm from an X 1.95 class flare, a long duration flare, and it had very huge impacts, but probably more than it should have. And I'll get to why that is a little bit later on. But the interplanetary magnetic field had a positive tilt, which actually is not conducive to creating geomagnetic storms, as if it had a negative tilt. So let me dive into my notes. The stored hill in the field. So the planetary magnetic field acts as a shield from solar radiation. Otherwise, the solar storms would strip our atmosphere away. So thank God for our planetary magnetic field. Most charged plasma, when a solar storm comes, and it just creates this whole elongating pattern with our magnetic field. It's really cool to watch that. But most of the charge is directed towards the poles, and then as it comes into the ionosphere, the magnetic sphere, and such, it starts to get dispersed, and it reacts with the gases, and we get the beautiful auroras and everything. The stronger the storm, the more that charge fans out away from the poles. So if it's really strong, you start to see auroras farther south. Now, so mostly disperses the charges in the atmosphere, but some still is going to reach the Earth. And some going to penetrate. But because the storm happened during what's called the BZ positive, which is just saying that the interplanetary magnetic field had more of a northern than a southern facing tilt, that's not conducive to coupling with the incoming solar energy. So a lot of that gets dispersed and bypasses the Earth. But I believe some of it gets caught up in the Birkeland currents and does get funneled down into the planet, meaning that in a way, we really, and let me just reiterate, we dodged a major bullet here. It's like I'm still a little bit shaky from it, because if it was a BZ negative with that kind of an impact, GPSs probably would have gone down, cell, internet, maybe power grid disruption. I mean, we were that close, but because it was a BZ positive, a lot of that charge got deflected, and we still got auroras down to Florida, which gives you an idea how strong that was. And so the satellites got spared. Great, the grid got spared, but was that at the expense of more energy being inputted into the Earth and into the atmosphere? So this would have been easily a G5 storm, probably the strongest one, according to Stefan Burns, since 1989 or even earlier. So again, I'm still a little bit shaky about the whole thing, and most people don't even know how close we came to a major impact. Now, it wasn't going to be the doomsday flare. We weren't going to lose everything on the Earth for years on end, but it sure would have changed our lives, at least I believe. So how does this affect winter weather? Well, it doesn't create storms, but rather it adds energy into the atmosphere to enhance storms that are already developing, basically. But there may be another way that solar activity affects and enhances winter weather that's less known, and that comes down to understanding the nature of the polar vortex. When the polar vortex is strong, mostly the cold air stays near the poles and the Arctic. When it's weak, more polar outbreaks can escape the poles and come down south, like into the lower 48. Now, there's something called sudden stratospheric warming that happens at the North Pole sometimes. And when that happens, it weakens the polar vortex and it allows more cold air and more storminess to affect farther south. So basically, to be clear, we'll call it SSW for short, sudden stratospheric warming. To be clear, SSWs are created by tropospheric waves, but I believe, and I don't have, I may, if I have days on end to spend, I'll do some research and find the correlation. But I do believe when there's more solar activity, that enhances that SSW effect and creates weaker polar vortices and therefore more colder air affecting here on the surface. Let me dive into my notes. But solar wind is driven downward into the poles, increasing the energy in that area. So basically, when we have enhanced solar storms, like during solar maximums, a lot of that energy is driven down into the poles. And if it's an exceptionally strong solar event, that can penetrate even down into the stratosphere, maybe have an effect and enhancing SSW events and weakening the polar vortex. It's all theoretical right now, but I may do more research and find some correlation. I've already touched on it. I've already found some, and I've got it basically in my notes. But so most scientists would disagree with this. But when did we last hear about the polar vortex? Like, when was that really, really in the news? 2014 comes to mind, where we had a crazy, bitter cold winter. Coldest probably, in at least 20 or 30 years, right? Now, 2014, wasn't that during the last solar maximum? Why, yes, it was. Imagine that. And you can look through weather data even farther back. Like, how about Superstorm Sandy? That was 2012. That was early in solar maximum for solar cycle 24. And what about the superstorm of 1993? Do you guys on the East Coast or Atlanta, do you remember that one? A blizzard in Atlanta? Well, 1993 was also during a solar maximum. And 1992, there were nor'easters so bad in New York City. I saw sheet metal being blown, and the East River flooded, basically, all the way to the Harlem River. It all flooded and spilled into East End Avenue, basically. That was during a solar maximum. Oh, and by the way, expect another potential nor'easter this coming weekend. Probably more in the eastern coastal New England than where I live in the Catskills. But again, when there's more energy injected into the system and it makes the storm stronger, they try to cut the gradient, so to speak, or try to pull closer to their upper air support. And in lay terms, that means they tend to track further north and west than what the computer models pick up on 5 or 6 days ahead of time. We'll see if that is the case this time, and I think we may be due for another one. So anyway, to be clear, solar weather is not creating these events. They're atmospheric-driven events, but they are, in my opinion, adding fuel to those fires. I've looked farther back even. There's definitely a correlation between periods of solar maximum and greater temperature anomalies. stronger storms on average, basically. So also people are reporting a big uptick in chemtrails ahead of this latest winter storm in the United States. A lot of credible people have been saying that. People have been saying they haven't seen this many ever, basically. Now, honestly, in my travels around the Hudson Valley, all I saw personally was common contrails that are being enhanced by upper atmospheric moisture that can precede a big winter storm or a big storm, but sometimes by over 1,000 miles. So to me, I didn't see anything unusual, but let me put it this way: weather modification, it's real. The only question now is to what degree is it happening? What degree does the government not disclose it? And how much of an impact it's having on our weather today. So theoretically, you can enhance storms. You can enhance precipitation through chemtrailing. That's theoretical. That's actually more than theoretical. Since the 1950s, they've been doing cloud seeding. And there was a few events in the last couple of years. One, I think, in Texas that caught my mind, which was basically, unfortunately, like a lot of children died. There's huge, intense flooding, and that happened in a couple of areas. But these were in localized areas, and in those cases, the precipitation that fell, the amount of rain, far exceeded what the computer models were saying. This latest storm was over a very large swath, and the storm performed almost to the letter what the computer models had predicted. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic there. But in any event, theoretically, you can enhance precipitate through chemtrailing. And so this was very credible evidence, basically, of localized flood events recently. And to do something to affect a storm of this magnitude would require massive amounts of manpower and supplies. In other words, to affect thousands of miles in a huge storm would take, God, how many pilots would that take, and how much raw materials would that take? So, I question it, but again, very credible people that know the difference between contrails and chemtrails. What I see on like Facebook and the internet, 80% of the time, those are contrails. And again, I'm a trained meteorologist. I've been studying this for over 40 years, but not 100%. And that's the key, not 100% of the time. So still intelligent people are witnessing this. So until I know for sure, I can't say that anybody's wrong that believes that the chemtrails or other geoengineering techniques were responsible for enhancing the storm, basically. Now, on another note, another way that weather could be modified is through heating of the upper troposphere and lower stratosphere. Those are the layers and the temperature profiles. That's what steers weather systems at the surface. So if you warm and cool a section of the upper atmosphere, that can steer a storm. That would require a ton of energy, advanced technology, but still it's possible through HAARP, H-A-A-R-P technology maybe, or other technologies that I'm not aware of. And if you think about it, if you can weaponize the weather, you'd have such an advantage in this world. I have no doubt that this is being experimented and used. And when meeting out through conspiracies from the false flags, you figure out what the end game is. That's not just with this, but with anything. And usually the end game has to do with money, has to do with control and power. Now, in the case of this large storm, all three of those factors are possibly at play. So I don't think you can rule it out based on the available evidence and what people have seen. Personally, I don't believe that this was the case. However, having said that, it's quite possible that in certain local areas that there was some enhancement of the storm or precipitation. And those areas that got hit the hardest, what you want to do is research that area and see what would they gain by devastating a certain area? Like, how could that benefit the powers that be in terms of like money, power, or control? And I have no doubt that weather modification is being experimented, it's being used, it's being weaponized, because if you can control the weather, you have such an advantage when it comes to things like warfare and stuff like that. So to reiterate, in my opinion, based on intuition and careful research, this was mostly a natural event created by unusual atmospheric conditions enhanced by the accumulation of plasmic and ionic energy from solar maximum 2025, which we're starting to come out of now. I say mostly because of the sheer large numbers of sightings of chemtrails or whatever, alleged chemtrails ahead of the storm, and just the way certain things played out, artificial enhancements definitely cannot be ruled out. So in any event, but no matter what, spirit, God, or source is in charge, and collective prayer is very, very powerful. So let's keep sending positive energy out. People need to be helped. They need to be, comforted, sheltered after these and other major events. And at the end of the day, the Earth's going to have the final say anyway. The Earth is really here to balance things out. So when we talk about things like climate and weather, well, we are creating imbalance in the Earth, so the Earth is going to counterbalance that. Part of the way it might do that is with more intense storms. And also there's a lot of natural shifting and changing that's happening. And I'm going to get to something very, very important in just a minute that has huge ramifications on our future. So this will be more of the psychic forecast part of this video. So these are very important signs moving forward, and they could have earth-altering effects. So, by the way, if you're enjoying this video, please like it and hype it so maybe we can share it with more people. Let me know what you think. Natural, man-made, somewhere in between in the comments. And if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel and more of our videos will come up on your homepage. So firstly, there's a spiritual side to the solar flares, the coronal mass ejections and such. And the influence that they have on the Schumann resonance, which is basically, we'll just say, the heartbeat of the Earth, but a resonant frequency that connects the Earth with our brain waves, our heart waves, and connects the Earth with the cosmos energetically. And and when we have these solar flares, basically the sun is releasing encoded spiritual messages into the collective fields that can help activate our higher mind, can activate our DNA so that we start to be able to develop higher gifts and stuff like that. And, I explained a little bit more of that before. So basically, the sun is sort of like a lens of spiritual energy, like cosmic energy or the central sun. And when we have these flares, it releases a lot of plasma, a lot of energy, a lot of plasmic energy, photonic energy, light energy. And these are light code frequencies, and they are creating changes and enhancement in the collective fields, in the earth fields, and in our personal and collective consciousness, basically. It also creates more volatility and stress on the flip end of things, and more people are losing it. And it's been shown through history that more revolutionary wars, activity, struggle, strife, and violence happen around the solar maximums when more of this energy is affecting our collective field. So it does have that effect also. So what we want to do is we want to stay in our heart, stay in presence, and work with these frequencies. And the more in your heart you are, the less you're going to be triggered and programmed by what's going on outside. So in the short term, expect tension and violence to build on the planet. People are going to snap, unfortunately. We have to vibrate in the heart, vibrate harder, feed the collective with more positivity. We'll see more geopolitical tensions, more developing more revolutionary activities, more standoffs, more changes. You have surprises around Donald Trump and the U.S. presidency, other world leaders stepping down or being forced down. What we are seeing, and the trends intensify basically, and that also leads to more volcanic activity. I think this particular event is really feeding the magma flows and the volcanic activity, but more earthquake activity on the planet also. Even in the next few weeks, even is coming up, and more again, strong and unusual weather systems. So what happens in the long term, though? That's what's even more concerning, and basically this solar flare was different. It was more impactful. It was only a 1.95. Now, granted, it was a long duration event, and it had a monster. It produced a monster CME, but still, the effects when the BZ was positive, which isn't conducive to geomagnetic storms here on Earth, we still almost had a G5. And that was from a 1.95 flare. To keep this in perspective, the 2003 superstorm event was an X45 class flare, and you go up a magnitude of 10 with each number. So that was like, what would that make that? Over 40 times stronger a flare that produced that. Yet we had auroras down to Florida. So this was different, more impactful, and will likely wake people up to the reality that the magnetic field here on planet Earth is weakening, and we are in the midst of a geomagnetic excursion that could lead to a polar flip. So if this latest storm doesn't wake people up and scientists start to do real research and start to study the effects and why this was different. I mean, people were reporting the craziest auroras they've ever seen. Some people said they could even hear it up north. So I think scientists are going to really start to double down on the research and understand that. And if that doesn't happen, solar cycle 26, the solar maximum that'll be around the mid 2030s, that's going to really, really wake people up. I actually started to feel like we were beginning a solar flip or geomagnetic excursion back in the 1980s, and I felt things changing then. Of course, I had my spiritual awakening in the late 70s, so maybe I was more sensitive to the changes. I don't know. But this is a huge deal moving forward, and it's going to really change society. It's going to change life as we know it, perhaps even within the next decades. Let me explain why. This will begin to cause climate change. I mean, it's already happening, but a different kind of climate change. And more likely, we start to go to a global cooling rather than a global warming. I mean, it could go either way. And there's been signs that the global warming period is starting to shift into cooling. And I'm not going to go into all the examples of that, but there's been signs of that. So as the climate change, it affects agriculture, like where you can grow food, where you can't grow food. It intensifies the flood drought cycle. It can create wars over water, resources, food, growing land, because some of the places that you can grow food, you may not be able to grow food in anymore. And technology is going to need to be upgraded, because what's happening when we're leading into or having a geomagnetic excursion or a polar flip is the magnetic field is weakening. And we've seen probably it's weakening faster than the 2 to 5% per decade, maybe more on the higher end. So this last solar storm, the one before it from, again, lower end X-class flares, the impacts were much greater on Earth than what we would expect, say, like 20 or 30 years. So this is all showing the magnetic field is weakening. And before a solar flip happens, or even a geomagnetic excursion, the magnetic field weakens up to about 90%, and then we become much more vulnerable to solar radiation. It's not 100%, we're not going to lose our atmosphere, but technology is going to have to be upgraded because otherwise all the satellites would be toast, the next big storm. And things are going to have to be, we're going to have to adapt to on Earth. We may need stronger sunscreens even, or ways of dealing with more solar energy, radiation, changes of the radiation levels here on the planet. Because again, when the magnetic fields weaken, this last solar storm was an R4 radiation storm, which is the strongest in since 2003. So more of these events are going to be happening as we're moving forward. As the magnetic field continues to weaken, and then again, it may flip back. It may not be, then it's an excursion. But anyway, maybe I'm explaining too much. Let me go back into my notes. So, trend toward more severe weather events, geological, takes years. According to models, it takes hundreds of years for a geomagnetic excursion to complete. That's when the poles start to flip, but then they revert back to their original position. And 1 to 10,000 years for a complete polar flip to happen. But there are some researchers that suggest that it can happen much more quickly, even in a matter of years. And if that happened, that would be very, very devastating for life on Earth. It could even be a near extinction event. That would be the absolute worst case scenario. It wouldn't be a complete extinction. We'd somehow survive. But what I feel is that it's more gradual. I don't think we're going to get into that worst case scenario. And secondly, I do believe we have help from God, from the ascended masters, the extraterrestrials, or whatever. And because a rapid flip could revert us back, to cave people, I think that we have help. I think the Earth is being monitored through higher forces that we don't necessarily understand. So we do have to prepare for change. Maybe we need to learn how to have greenhouses, how to have agriculture that could handle severe climate change and impacts. We turn more towards community, off-grid living, and stuff like that. That's likely to be a growing trend in the coming years, and we're going to be talking about that more and more here on the channel, especially if things progress the way that I believe that they are progressing. Also, it leads to more chaos and strife in the world. And between that and the attempts to transhumanism, or for technology to really take over things, a lot of people don't want that. They want to continue to evolve spiritually from the human perspective, rather than using technology to kind of getting them off of that track. So for the reasons of changes in our climate, changes in the sun, as well as more control being leveled on the masses and more pressure to give up our rights and to allow more, allow the technology to watch over us more. I can't even think of the word right now, but anyway, more surveillance, that's the word. And more control and stuff like that. For many reasons, a lot of people are going to be moving off grid and learning how to live more in harmony with Earth and nature. It doesn't mean a complete abandonment of technology. That's probably going to be part of it. But I think that that's the direction that we're going in. And I think by 2030, that's going to be really a pretty hot topic, and I think a lot of people are going to be doing that. So anyway, back into my notes. So it's really about more community-oriented living, which is part of, we are a community species after all, and we are basically beings connected to divine source and transmitters and transmuters of divine energy on a physical 3D environment, basically. So the technology really takes us away from that and who we are from spirit. So as things, settle down, maybe hundreds of years from now, technology will be part of the awakening and human evolution. But right now, certain forces want to use that for control, from what I'm seeing against us. So anyway, the more people that awaken and embrace spirituality, the smoother the transition is going to be. So let's start now individually. Let's work on our spirituality. Let's raise our vibration. And the more people that do that feed the collective, the easier the transition is going to be. And it won't be as hard on us. So we won't necessarily have to go through you know, a lot of the traumas that can happen if the world suddenly changes and stuff like that. So we can avoid the worst case scenario. We have help. We have divine consciousness that's working with us, trying to help us to avoid the worst case scenarios. But we have to acknowledge that we do have to adapt to the natural changes that are happening, that are maybe being exacerbated by human activity also. So that's basically what it is. So we want to be able to integrate into an evolving society rather than to disassociate from the dystopian one. So in other words, yeah, we would rather integrate spirituality into the society rather than it becoming all dystopian, and we really feel like we're forced that we have to live outside of society, let them duke it all out and figure it out, and then reintegrate later on. So anyway, that's basically what I have for you. So we'll post a psychic forecast that's relevant to this content over here for you. Over here, let's post the 26 things that you need to know. This is a psychic forecast also. A couple of them have already verified, so we're well on our way. So hopefully you find that helpful. I love you. See you at the next video.